Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing great. Great.
Excellent.
Good to be in the office.
Yeah, thanks for coming in.
Yeah,
It's a long haul out
I
there.
hadn't seen it in a while. The po-white wasn't very cooperative this morning,
No, it
but
sure was
I appreciate
not.
the heads up that it was backed up. But better late than never.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm excited to talk licensing with
Yeah.
you, and
Me too, always.
that's
Right?
heavy sarcasm on my part, by the way. Heavy sarcasm. But yes,
I understand. There's few of us out there. We're quirky.
exactly correct. Exactly.
I guess I should tell them who I am.
Yeah,
Is
I
that
think
what I
so.
should do?
Yeah, I think so.
Hi, I'm Don Lewis. I'm the Director of License Advisory Services here at Synergy. I've been here, it's over 8 years now. I think it's
Yeah.
flown by. I've had a great time. I've been in licensing specifically, software licensing specifically, for about 15 years. In IT for about 25 years in some form or fashion. I used to build PCs back in the white box era.
Wow.
Yeah. I have many scars probably from those old boxes, those clone boxes. But I enjoy talking licensing and have done it for many years.
Thank you for coming in. So, if you don't know me, my name is Ro Mead, and oddly, I enjoy talking licensing with you. But there are very few people that I really find the licensing conversation to be interesting.
Yeah.
I am, if I didn't say it, I am the CEO of Synergy Technical. I worked with Don in a prior life when I was a CIO, and he saved the company that I worked for just a ton of money, and I happily tell that story over and over. And today we're going to talk about licensing. But first, let me give you a little bit of background on Synergy Technical. So Synergy is a Microsoft partner. We've been in business for coming around on 14 years now, which is a little bit crazy. We have customers in all 50 states and over 70 countries. And we do everything Microsoft, including licensing.
Yeah, we do a lot.
Yeah, we do a lot. All right, so let me just advance our slides here because we somehow
Okay.
put me in charge of the slides, which maybe wasn't the best idea. But
And while she's getting the slides together,
Yep.
in essence, what we want to talk about, the theme is spring clean your licensing, right? But I want you to do it in the summer. I want you to do it in the fall. I want you to do it in the winter as well, right? It just happens to be spring. We're going to talk about a couple of key areas, and when I say I talk to customers all the time about licensing, I'm either talking to existing customers about projects and how to the licensing impact that might be in play for that particular project, but also talking to a lot of new customers that are licensing through other resellers, different types of agreements, and for one reason or another, we're having a conversation about what's in their environment. And how to license it. And some key areas that I want to talk about today are what we typically find in most organizations. You got to understand what you have. You've got to understand the models or agreement types that are available to you, right? You've got to understand what your users need. That's a big deal. It's easier said than done, but
so
we've got
don't
some
just
tools.
license them for everything.
No, unfortunately not. It's easy to paint them with that brush, right?
Yeah.
The administrative burden is a little less, but we'll go into a little bit of detail
Okay.
about that. Sometimes you just want, a lot of times what we see is when there's new management, a new CIO comes in, they want to engage us for a licensing assessment. They want to know what they're walking into. They want to know exactly what they have. And too many times it's a spreadsheet that's been maintained over years through multiple people, and relying on that, they don't have the confidence in that, right? They haven't
Right.
been here for that long. But in some other areas that I look at are looking ahead and choosing either one or multiple agreement types to fit what's coming, what you foresee coming. So those are the things that we're going to talk about today.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Well, let's talk about the different Microsoft licensing models. And there are a few, and I don't think anybody understands them, but maybe you do. I know you do.
I do, fortunately, but they're always changing, so I have to stay on top of my studies. And, obviously, I'm not going to read everyone on the slide here, but retail and OEM are not necessarily agreement types as much as they are how you buy software. Right?
Okay.
It's more of a transactional model. You can buy single versions. Retail is you go to a store or online and you buy a full version of the software. We don't see that as much anymore. Back in the day when they actually distributed software via CD or floppy disk. You did see those shrink wrap
Right.
boxes in Best Buy and Circuit City, things like that. That's not the norm anymore.
Do we see that with SMB customers?
You still see that some, not as much retail, but they will buy full package product, right? Downloadable media, but it's not under a volume license agreement.
Got it.
It's just a
Okay.
single transaction.
Okay.
OEM, pretty much everyone has experience with OEM. Any device, any PC is going to come with an OEM version of Windows at a minimum. You can also get, and we recommend this to customers, smaller, really small customers. If they need Office, do an OEM version when they buy the PC. They can get it for like $99. It's a lot cheaper to do it, but it doesn't really work for the enterprise. It's really only for those really small customers.
Got it.
Great segue into the enterprise agreement, right? That's the agreement that I have been familiar with for as long as I've been in licensing. It's designed for the larger customers. We find that it fits really well in the 2,000 and up user group, right? Although you can get into one for less than that, 500 I think is the entry point now. There's been some discussion, a rumor that maybe they'll increase that to 1,000. I wouldn't doubt it. The enterprise agreement has some benefits, but it also has some drawbacks. It's a little bit more onerous when it comes to length of term options as far as
It's
billing.
a 3-year agreement.
It is a 3-year agreement. You do have some options to adjust your accounts for subscription products on an annual basis. But anything else you're locked into for the 3-year term. Yeah, absolutely.
Got it.
Cloud solution provider, relatively new agreement relative to the IT space. We are a direct CSP provider, cloud solutions provider. There are two types, direct and indirect. Indirect would go through a distributor, much like Ingram Micro, Tech Data, things like that. And that distributor would provide that level of support and a portal, things like that. We are a direct cloud solutions provider, a very short list of those. In fact, I would argue we're one of the largest in North America.
I know that.
And we provide that front end support to our customers. And we have a support contract with Microsoft that we're able to tack into when necessary, tap into. But primarily when our customers call in for support, they're talking to Brett here on Broad Street.
Right. And I like to, with our customers, reiterate that, if you buy from Microsoft Direct online, which certainly many customers do, if you do that, when you reach out for support, you're reaching out for support through Microsoft Direct. And your call is being routed to wherever it is that your call is being routed to. The difference with buying through a CSP, particularly a direct CSP, is contractually we're required to support you. And that's part of what we do in selling licensing. So it's likely, in our case, that you're going to get the same person or one of the same handful of people every time, and they're going to know your environment. Whereas if you are going through direct, and there may be reasons you need to do that, but if you're going through direct, odds are very likely that you will never get the same person twice.
Well, and you have to go through knowledge base steps 1, 2, and 3 every time.
Yes.
You can't just say, hey, can we just pick up where we left off?
Right, exactly. So I like to make sure that customers know that.
Yeah, the other thing about the direct agreement, and this is in essence where you go to Microsoft.com and purchase services on a credit card. They have some invoices options. You'll never get a discount that way. You will always be paying full retail.
Correct. Yes.
Right? Just that simple. And while as a cloud solution provider, not everyone gets a discount. It's based on size, things like that. But you do have the opportunity to get a discount.
Yes.
We find that customers that buy direct via credit card, someone's got to file an expense report. Someone's got to pay it. When there's turnover, I can't tell you how many times I've had to go in and clean up the billing profiles because they're about to lose their licensing because it was someone's individual credit card.
Oh yeah, we've run into that all the time.
Yeah. So it's not recommended. It serves a purpose, but I would say probably 99% of the customers that we speak with that are on direct end up switching to us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
All right, you want me to roll on here?
Any questions about this particular the agreement
No.
slide? I know I haven't been watching the
Let
chat.
me-
Maybe we
yep.
check it.
Yep. So there is one right here. I have server licensing on an open value agreement, but I'm moving to Azure. What do I do with those licenses?
Oh, it's a great question. We don't talk a lot about Azure in this, but Azure is that hosted data center environment that you can build VMs, have storage. In fact, we don't have a data center, right? Any VMs
Never
we have,
have.
yeah, they're all in Azure.
Never have.
So when you build a VM in Azure, you have the opportunity to either build in the license cost, the Windows Server license, or SQL Server is also applicable, or you can bring your own. So in other words, you build the instance, say, hey, I'm bringing my own license. I don't want to
Okay.
rent yours.
Okay, so
And
I'm not required to buy the licensing.
No,
in
no,
Azure.
absolutely
That's
not.
interesting. Okay.
So as long as you maintain software assurance on those Windows Server licenses, you get what's referred to as a hybrid use benefit.
Okay.
So Windows Server Standard, you can run it either on-prem or in Azure. So you get two
Okay.
8-core VMs for 16 cores of Windows Server Standard. With Azure, with Windows Server Data Center, you actually can run it in both locations, right? So I can still run it on-prem,
Okay.
but I do get the use benefit of two 8-core VMs in the cloud as well.
Okay.
So it's very much, in fact, we've done some savings for customers where they built a huge Azure environment, but they were renting all the licenses. So we did the 3-year analysis, and it took about a year to recoup the cost of renting the license versus buying them outright and keeping them on SA.
Okay. So putting my old CIO hat on, let me just make sure that I'm understanding. If I have a data center and I have an enterprise agreement, and that enterprise agreement has my Windows Server licensing on it, and it also has my maybe SQL Server licensing, and I'm saying I'm going to move those servers to an Azure data center outside of my existing data center. I can port that license.
Correct. Yep.
Got it.
Exactly.
Okay.
It provides, you have entitlement in the Azure environment.
I always
you-
knew I was entitled. Sorry.
I act that way sometimes. Any other questions on that slide? Licensing models? I know that's not a very exciting one.
I mean, you are the only person I know that can make licensing even somewhat interesting, I have to tell you.
Well, I'm glad.
Even somewhat interesting. All right, so let's talk about a hybrid licensing model. What does that mean?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we talked about the agreement types,
Right.
and a customer can have more than one, and they supplement each other or complement each other.
So I'm not locked into being with just a CSP or an
Correct,
EA or even OEM.
Correct. So, for instance, one example might be that customer has a great relationship with Microsoft. Their Microsoft rep, they get a lot of value out of that relationship. They're a 3,000 seat organization, so they're getting level B pricing, right?
Okay.
They're getting very aggressive pricing, probably something they're not even going to explore in the CSP model. But they are a seasonal organization. So seasonally, they add about 500 users on and off.
So like retail.
Right.
Okay.
And they only add them for 3 months out of the year. The EA doesn't have a 3-month, right?
Right.
So what we would recommend to them is keep your EA, but for those seasonal employees, license them on CSP. You're going to pay a little bit higher unit price,
Okay.
but you're only going to have to pay for the 3 months that you need, not the 12 months that you would have to pay on the
Okay.
enterprise. That's just one example.
Okay. And I'm not locked into that 3 years.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay. Other reasons for
Well, yeah, I mean, what we find, certain projects require temporary licensing,
okay.
right? Some like the local support versus direct support. So they
Okay.
might have some things that maybe they have an online, great example, our nonprofit customers, they get a grant from Microsoft, $2,500 a year to do Azure, right? They do that direct with Microsoft. They have to get that grant. But then they do the remainder of their Azure environment with us because we can then support that environment for them, right? So that's another example of hybrid.
I'm thinking of We do a lot of work in the private equity space where we work with private equity firms that buy and sell customers. And so they consolidate companies and they carve
Spin 'em
out
off,
companies. And hybrid has been just a great scenario for them in that, they might know that they're going to have 2,000, 3,000 users that are going to remain with the company. But they're either considering carving out a division, and so they want to keep that licensing separate, or they have carved it out, but they have some agreement that says that they have to maintain the licensing for a year to 2 years. And that has been really, really great
Yeah.
for those organizations.
Yeah, absolutely.
So certainly we do see more hybrid now than I think we used to. We didn't see it in the beginning.
Well, one other example would be you want to try out maybe, and we'll talk a little bit later as we get to granularity and different license suite types and things like that. But a lot of times before they renew an annual for a year, right? Maybe they're looking at a switch for 300 of their users to a lower edition suite. We might want to live trial all those for a month before we commit to a full year. Sometimes we run into mailbox sizes. Sometimes we run into feature limitations.
Got it.
Right? Whereas if you've committed to all 300 of those for the year, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry it didn't work for those 100.
So even in the CSP space, and I think we want to make sure we clarify this, you can have hybrid, which is enterprise plus CSP. You can also have hybrid, which is CSP annual plus CSP monthly.
That's a great call out.
And those are different for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, and the scenarios are very similar though, where you've got an annual that you're comfortable, not going to need to get rid of, and those variables, those monthly amounts, you're paying a little bit more for the right to be able to back out of them if you need to.
Right.
Where customers get a little bit hung up on the monthly is they think, well, what if I do keep them for 12 months? Well, then you annualize them the minute you realize you're going to need them for the
Right.
full term, so you're not paying
Right.
the increased unit price.
Because you can always convert a monthly license to an annual. You can only convert an annual to a monthly at the end
Once
of the
a year.
annual term.
That's correct, at the
That's-
expiration.
And I think that people don't necessarily understand that when they're,
Oh,
but
definitely
again, that's
so.
part of the conversation that you have.
Hey, look, if Microsoft made all this easy, I'd probably be out of work. So I'm okay with it.
I'd find something for you to
I
do.
appreciate that.
I'd find something for you to do, don't worry. We did get a question around the hybrid licensing model, but I
Okay.
think we've addressed it. So what
Okay.
are some scenarios where I might consider a hybrid licensing
Yeah, I
model?
think we did kind of
I
go
feel
into
like
that.
we've-
Good,
we
good.
have- But if we didn't give you a good answer, reach out to us for sure.
Yeah,
and
no,
we will-
absolutely.
We will absolutely address that. All right, so let's move on to the next slide. The case for licensing optimization.
So I'm going to go back and talk a little bit of history.
All right.
Before the cloud, before subscriptions, we counted PCs. That's how we
Okay.
licensed things,
Right.
right? That's
I can remember that well.
yeah, and
Yes.
and PCs don't fluctuate as much as people,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
The person might leave, their PC stays there,
Yes.
especially back in the desktop days.
Yes. That's
Right.
absolutely true.
So what we ended up with was a very normalized, stable license mix. The EA fit that very well, right? You counted your PCs, and then once a year, if you added PCs, you did a true up.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, you're bringing back nightmares, but
I
yes.
know, right? I know, right? I can't tell you how many conversations, but that the EA fit that very well. Well, when you manage your licensing with that in mind, and you switch to subscription-based licensing, what you run into in the device-based licensing days, there was nothing that kept you from installing more than what you were licensed for.
And you
That
crossed
was-
your fingers and hope you didn't get audited.
Well, that was the true up. It was
Right.
programmatic. You did it once a year.
Right.
Whereas we know you can't assign a subscription license to someone if you don't have it.
True. Yes.
Okay?
Absolutely true.
So to ease the administrative burden, sometimes large customers tend to paint all employees with as big a brush as they can because they can't go into detail and break down, well, this particular group of users only needs this mix of products.
So I'm going to buy E5s for everybody, as
Right.
an example.
Exactly.
That would be incredibly expensive.
That would be excessive. Absolutely right. So what we find is that we go in and do engagements with customers. It's not a difficult thing to do, but it requires an outside force or presence to make it happen. I don't know why that is.
Right.
It just does. But we come in and we build processes and groups and things like that. And we've got a pretty large, mature methodology. And in essence, it allows them to be more specific and have a subset of their users only be licensed for those things they need, and thereby saving cost. Right?
So can I build like Azure AD groups to manage that?
Absolutely. And that's a key part of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I don't have to worry about unassigning, reassigning. If I've got a user and I put them in this group, then that group gets XYZ licensing.
Yeah, and even dynamic group membership makes it even easier.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
A lot of the times where we find waste is in the offboarding process. The offboarding step was not completed. There's a lot of detail in that and where you can find this, the money. But that's where we find a lot of surplus. Absolutely. Yeah. Timing of agreements, right? That's a key thing to understand. If you're an EA customer right now and you're about to come up for renewal, we talked about hybrid use benefit of Azure, right? Well, if you have instances that you're renting the license in Azure, we can do an analysis and find that buying Windows Server licenses at 3-year-old pricing on your last true up is cheaper than right?
Right.
So we want to make sure that we
Right.
each agreement has its pros and cons. One of the pros of an EA is price lock for 3 years. So the last 3 years, we've certainly seen price increases, and we can use that to our advantage to build our environment out.
Yeah.
Redundancy. Best of breed was really keen probably 10 years ago, 7 years ago even, right? There was a fox and hen house mentality that they didn't want Microsoft to use Microsoft MFA. They wanted RSA or something else. They wanted this best of breed mentality out there.
Right.
Well, what we find is that's no longer really the case. I mean, Microsoft's in the Magic Quadrant in most of their security areas.
Right.
And what we find is, there's third-party solutions that they're paying for that they also have that solution in Microsoft.
Well, and I would argue pretty strongly, and we see this when we do security CIEs, that in a lot of cases, customers don't necessarily realize what they are licensed for and the capabilities they have within the Microsoft 365 suite. So they might have a third-party MFA solution or a third-party maybe labeling solution and not realize I'm already paying for this with Microsoft, and I'm likely, in fact, paying for a better product that I'm not using. That's going to be more comprehensive kind of and integrate better
Absolutely.
than what I've got.
Yeah, we see it a lot. And it's so funny how it comes up sometimes. Sometimes it's in the context of, hey, Don, we're thinking about switching off of XYZ, and we were wondering what the solution for Microsoft would be. And the solution's XYZ for Microsoft, and guess what? You already own it.
Right.
And that always has a nice response from them.
Right.
Yeah.
I tell customers all the time that if you're paying for a third-party security solution, security in particular, productivity certainly. I mean, we see it with Zoom, and we see it with
Absolutely.
Productivity solutions also, Slack versus Teams.
Mm-hmm.
But I say, if you're paying for something outside of Microsoft, let's go ahead and do either a productivity CIE or let's do a security CIE and show you what's already there. And then maybe you're going to keep what you have because there are reasons for doing it. But it's pretty likely that you're going to look at what you're already paying for and say, you know what, I've got some cost savings here by eliminating this third-party solution.
But not only that, the collaboration as a former, I used to do a lot of CIEs. I was, I think, our first facilitator, if I'm not mistaken.
You were.
But to expose customers to what Microsoft 365 can do for them on their daily routine. I can't tell you how many times you see them writing down, I'm going to go back and do this in my daily routine. So
Right.
it is very exciting. Absolutely.
Right, right, right.
I was gonna. One of the other things that I see happen, customers go to the cloud and they start out with a couple of workloads and they build out over time, especially their security environment.
Yes.
So what I find a lot of times, and that maybe they weren't advised well, or maybe they're buying direct, so they're just picking what they need. But a lot of times, maybe we've got a customer that starts out with an Office 365 suite and an Intra P1, right? They need MFA and conditional access.
Okay.
And then down the road, they decide, hey, we really need to do some device management, so they add Intune,
Right.
So now we're looking at the sum of the parts is way more than the bundle, right? So what we would do is encourage them to either do the EMS E3 plus, right, to get the Intra and the Intune and some additional functionality. Or we might look at, hey, for just a couple dollars more, you do the M365 suite, and now you've got Windows and these other benefits. How would these fit into your security posture?
So is the general rule that if you already have the Windows licensing, probably EMS plus O365 makes sense, but if you also need the Windows licensing, then you're much better to
Yeah, the suite's a
Windows
no-brainer
suite.
at that point. Yeah.
Yeah.
And for a lot of customers, they decide to look at some of the features of Windows Enterprise because it only costs them $1.50 a month.
Right.
Right. So,
Right.
but yeah, as you grow, as your organization grows, it's easy to skip over some bundles that can save you money by adding a la carte services. I guess
And
that's
not
my
realize
point.
that that's even happening.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Any questions for optimization?
I'm not sure. Let me flip to that screen. I got a
I'll
lot of
say the chat-
screens going on over
chat
here.
has been going on fire.
Nope, we
No
don't have
questions on
anything
that
there.
one?
Nope,
Okay, good.
we are good there. All right, so let me go ahead and advance here.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about the Microsoft licensing assessment that we offer.
Right. So what we do is we collect data from a number of sources. Customers have tools in place, or we can utilize Microsoft tools to collect what's in the environment. If you've ever looked in System Center, Microsoft is identified in 7 different ways: Microsoft, Inc., Microsoft,
Yep.
Microsoft Corporation, Microsoft. So each licensed publisher over the years might have had it listed a different way. So once we collect that data, we what we would call normalize and cleanse that data, right, so that we can really do some pivots on it. And once we have an understanding of what's in the environment, we overlay their license entitlements,
Okay.
right? And our deliverable is we're going to communicate to them their effective license position, right? This is where you are in time. You're using this, you're licensed for this, and typically there's a delta. Now, sometimes it's a good delta, sometimes it's a bad delta.
Yeah, and I want to throw something out there. That is not an audit.
No, absolutely.
And
It's
it
a self audit.
Yes.
Might be a way of looking at it.
And it is certainly not given back to Microsoft.
No, yeah, absolutely. We always tell customers we're not the Microsoft police. We guide you in the best way we can. But this is, in fact, what customers should do is perform their own audit, as if Microsoft were doing it,
Right.
so that they know what they have.
And if they don't know how to do that, we can certainly do it as part of this
Absolutely,
engagement.
absolutely.
Yeah.
But that effective license position is very eye-opening. Customers, the majority of our customers have been around for way longer than we have,
Yes.
right? And a lot of times their licensing is a result of the way we've always done things.
Right. Or someone maybe not being educated in how to license.
Yeah. Well, the EA, it's easy just to renew. You know, it's got some cryptic descriptions on some of the stuff,
Yeah.
and somebody says, well, I don't know if we need that. Well, let's just go ahead and put it on just in case.
Well, and I can talk to a really good example of that in that when I was a CIO and you were advising me, I can remember going through that renewal process and giving you is it a CPS? Is that what
Yeah,
that's called?
customer price sheet. I have a great memory.
I
Look
know,
at you.
right? Giving it to you, and our run rate was, I don't know, maybe $1 million a year or so. It was significant
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah, absolutely.
And I can remember you coming back and saying, well, you don't need this, you don't need this, you don't need this, you don't need this. And and I'll never forget that that was, I mean, that was money out of your pocket because,
Oh, sure.
commission for sure. But it saved us just a ton. And no one on my team even understood what we were licensing for. We were just scared to not license.
Yeah.
We didn't want to go through that.
Well, they've heard all the horror stories about audits and the BSA and things like that.
Yeah.
It's easy just to just
Renew.
over license.
And renew.
Yeah, it's safer to over license than it is to get in that
Yeah.
situation. And it's always fun to be able to go in and tell a customer, hey, you don't need to spend this money anymore.
Right.
Right. We see it a lot with they've gone to the cloud, but they're still buying some perpetual core cow or something like that. I'm like, no, that's bundled in. That's
Right.
that's an entitlement as your part of your suite. So it's a fun time. Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
The assessment, sometimes they're evaluating agreement type.
So do I need a CSP, an EA?
Right. Why and why? Sometimes it's what we provide is we don't do EAs, as you well know.
Right.
We're just a second set of eyes. We're an unbiased third party that comes in and just helps them navigate the counts, the product
Right.
mix, things like that. We do it every day. They do
Right.
it once a year if they're lucky, once every 3 years maybe.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, any questions about the license
We
assessment?
have all kinds of questions about the
Yeah, I
licensing
figured, yeah.
assessment. So we've talked mostly about cloud, but can you help me assess my perpetual or on-premise licensing?
Oh, absolutely. Whether with your tools or we can deploy some agentless tools that allow us to collect that similar data.
Okay. Knew this one was coming. How much is a licensing assessment? Knew
Great
that
question.
one was coming.
$1 million. No.
You sell one of those, man, we're taking another Bahamas.
Right, absolutely. No, it just depends, like most things, right? It depends on the size of the organization. Sometimes they want us to analyze things outside of just the Microsoft stack. They want us to look at their Adobe, spend, some other things. So,
True, because
yeah.
we can do that also.
Yeah, absolutely. So it just depends. But I have not done a single license assessment where we have not saved at least 3x what they paid for it. And that's a conservative,
Yeah.
In a lot of cases, it's a lot higher.
Yeah. Here's one. I buy my licensing through another provider, a competitor. Can I do a licensing assessment through you?
Absolutely. In fact, look, there are not that many new cloud customers these days. Most customers are in the cloud, right? They're buying from somewhere at this point.
Yeah.
And what we find is that we focus really heavily on the customer side of things. I think one of the reasons you hired me, I think we talked about this, was I will always do what's right for the customer.
Absolutely,
Not
yes.
what's right for my pocket.
Yes.
And the customers, I think, get that. They must, because they keep going to other companies and contacts and,
Right.
and having us come in. And it's such a wonderful thing for someone to reach out and say, hey, I landed at XYZ law firm and I'd really love to work with you since I worked with you at such and such.
Yeah, and we get customers that way all the time where they've changed companies and say, hey, I want to work with Synergy. for
Yeah,
licensing.
I'm very proud of that.
Yes.
Really.
Can you give specific examples of where you have saved customers money? Obviously, we can't name customer names.
I'll try not to. Well, if you see a blur, it's because I said it incorrectly and they edited it or something.
Or delay. They
Yeah,
popped
in
up.
fact, I think it was 3 weeks ago, we were having a conversation with a customer. They were probably a 1,500 seat customer, right? And they were asking, as we're going through the user mix and things like that, they had identified a group of about 300 users that were iPad only.
Mm-hmm.
And they were being licensed with E5.
Oh,
Right. We did a little digging, found out they didn't have larger than 2 gig mailboxes. They satisfied the screen size and their requirements. Obviously, on the iPad, they didn't need the full version of Office. And so we did the analysis, and by switching those E5s out to F3s, it saved them about $200,000 a year.
wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's real money.
That's real money.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah,
So they were pretty happy.
Yeah.
Very happy, in fact.
Yeah, yeah. I saved me 200,000. I might be pretty happy.
Oh, yeah, yeah, that's right. Inflation, I think back in the day only saved you 100.
It might have been 150.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
okay.
I don't know. The number
In
gets
today's dollars, that's a lot.
the number gets bigger in my mind every year. I just know
As
it
it
was
goes
a lot.
around the campfire, yeah, absolutely.
I know it was a lot, and I know that I looked really good as a result of it. And really, that's all that matters.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
one last question around Microsoft licensing assessments. So you've talked about large companies and the savings there. I'm with a smaller company, and is it worth it for me to review my licensing?
I would argue it's more so.
Okay.
The number itself might not be as big, the savings number,
Right.
but as a percentage of your total spend, it might be even bigger. The rationale there is smaller companies have smaller resource pools.
Okay.
And the licensing administration is something that tends to fall off the I'm too busy to get done.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And so what we find is someone invites us in, everybody thinks they got a clean house. I poke around a little bit and find some folding money in the sofa.
Right.
Right. So yeah, it's almost more impactful for the smaller companies.
Okay. Good to know. All right. So that's what we have, really.
Okay. That was fun. I enjoyed it. I'll come to the office
Thank
more
you.
often. Yeah, if we can talk licensing.
Thank you for making licensing interesting.
Yeah,
for me.
absolutely. And if anyone has questions, I'm always available.
Just reach out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thank
Take
you.
care.